Good morning. Welcome to the Point. In this election cycle, every U.S. House seat is up for a vote. In the state of Michigan, one U.S. Senate seat is up too. It's currently held by senior Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. We talked to her about her issues and the upcoming election. Senator, let's talk a little bit about something that you call Make It in America.
Right.
Kind of stems out of the Buy American legislation that I didn't know, but you said was passed in 1933?
33.
So
yeah.
It's been around for a long time. Problem is, like a lot of bills, once they're around long enough, they get carve-outs, they get cutouts, they get exceptions, they get waivers, and you even said loopholes.
Loopholes,
and so,
yes.
but that loophole comes with a big price tag. How much federal government spending money is going to non-American countries that could rightfully be spent right here?
$92 billion is going to foreign companies because of these waivers and exemptions. And I think it's at a point now where it really is loopholes. And there's four big ones that, they're a number, but four big ones. One that drives me absolutely crazy is the fact that the Department of Defense does the majority of purchasing in this category, and there's a waiver for anything not used in America. Most of what we do in defense, the Stryker, the Bradley fighting mission, the armor, I mean, all the weapons, they're all going to be used overseas. And so when I ask about that, there's not a good answer about why we would have a big waiver for that. In fact, I want us making our own weapons and armor and vehicles. And I was over at Pashan here in town today where they're doing incredible work making vehicles. It seems to me we would want Americans in American fighting vehicles. So that one, and then there are others, but one other one I would mention is that there's an exemption if something's not available in America, which sounds reasonable, except that they've gotten very, very lax. And the Inspector General at Department of Defense, for instance, said that two recent examples of where they were made mistakes, not paying attention, whatever it was, Air Force football uniforms are made by companies overseas, and it turns out that in Wisconsin, there's a company that can do that. And so there's got to be accountability and transparency about what's going on, and we've got to close those loopholes.
Here's the other problem, is that it's not just about making things and having American taxpayer money going back to American taxpaying companies and American taxpaying workers, but it's also about a security issue, because if you are buying products from a foreign entity, you can't guarantee the supply line in the case of a conflict, and that could leave our troops vulnerable.
Well, that's what it seems to me, and that's why I originally proposed in the context of appropriations that we eliminate that exemption, and Department of Defense pushed back, and so we're going to have more conversations about what it is that would cause them to want that to be there, and if it's going to be there, it should be very narrow exceptions to this. I mean, it seems to be in our national security interest to make sure everything we're doing is in America. Plus, I would argue it's better quality. I mean, we've got the best workers, we've got the folks that are doing the best work, so I would want the best for our men and women serving.
When we talk about this process and you say the Defense Department pushes back, the thing that people may not fully understand is when it comes to budgeting, it's like stretching a rubber band in 12 different directions, because members have their priorities for their constituents, the departments have their priorities, other legislators have their own priorities that may not be counter, but they may not coincide with yours. And so we're in that budget process now, and I know we can't talk about a lot of specifics because you're involved in negotiations, but in general, as we get closer and closer to the end of September, how confident are you that a very, and my words not yours, divided Congress can come together for a spending bill a short time before the election?
I actually believe that we can. I mean, we actually did that last year, and we put in place 2-year funding caps, so we know what we're dealing with this year.
So the dollars are kind of already settled.
Pretty well set. And now there is a difference. I mean, I do have to say the White House and the President have said they'd like to see a government shut down. But what's interesting is that Senator McConnell, Speaker Ryan have said no, absolutely not. I think they understand that when one party controls everything, they certainly are going to be blamed if there's a government shutdown. And so, and we don't want it because it first of all, it costs so much money when you're stopping and starting things. There's so much waste in doing that. And there's no reliability and consistency. People need to have confidence, that there's consistency going forward. And so I think both sides, I know in the Senate, now I can't speak as much in the House, but both sides in the House want to actually do our jobs and get a budget. And so far, we're moving through in regular order right now, and I give people on both sides credit for that, moving forward to actually pass bills. And hopefully, that's going to get all the way to the finish line.
I'm going to jump around a bit in this because there are a number of things I want to talk to you
Sure.
about. One we talked about the last time you were here, and I expressed my kind of astonishment at the time, but it was a real thing. Not that I didn't believe it, but there was a gag order that kept. You were explaining that pharmacists were prohibited from telling me as a customer that there was a cheaper prescription,
right,
because of the pressure that was put on them by drug companies, and there has since been legislation.
Yes, well, and I know when the Michigan pharmacist brought this to me, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. And so, but it's true, and this is the pharmacist, not every single one, but many contracts have in them, the contract they have with the pharmaceutical company or the insurance company and so on, has a gag clause that says you can't tell people when they come to the counter if they could get a cheaper price by paying cash or using some other kind of discount rather than their insurance. And since I've started talking about this, I've had my own family and members of my own staff actually go to the counter and talk to pharmacists and say, oh my gosh, when you ask, they can tell you, but they can't offer it up. So I've put together legislation that just passed the Senate. I'm so pleased about this. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, Susan Collins and I, the lead, bipartisan effort. And we have a bill in the Finance Committee of mine that passed. We've got another one that deals with other parts of insurance that we hope is going to pass very, very soon. And it was interesting because I expected a huge pushback, and because it's so indefensible, what we got from the industry was, oh, we don't do that. We don't do that. Nobody does that. And so I said, great, nobody does it. You won't mind if we prohibit these gag orders. And so there was no good argument for it. And people said, this is shocking. And so we've passed the bill in the Senate. I hope it's going to get signed very soon.
This is a little off the beaten path. And I know how contentious the healthcare argument has been in Washington. But
Right.
Isn't at the base of that argument, at least part of that argument, about just this kind of thing, about cost containment or about trying to get the lowest price? And I don't mean just for prescription drugs, which we know is a huge driver, but even services. Here in the state of Michigan, and they were talking about it when you were serving in the state legislature, about auto no fault and trying to get a fee schedule so you can get those fees more in line. And without relitigating the Affordable Care Act and what's happened to it since, does Congress have the ability, forget for a moment the will, but do they have the ability to help with cost containment when it comes to medical
Yes,
care?
I believe that. And competition helps. I mean, if Medicare negotiated best price, that's what the VA does for veterans, you would bring down prices. If we said that the same FDA-approved safe drug sold in Canada, one side of the bridge versus the other, that you could pick whichever side of the bridge to be able to purchase that medicine, including businesses and hospitals and pharmacies and so on, you would bring down price. What we have is a situation now where the largest number of lobbyists in D.C. are the pharmaceutical industry, about 15 per every senator, 1,500 lobbyists. And their mission is to stop competition and keep prices high. And they've been pretty successful at that, unfortunately. So that's why I was so pleased about the gag rule, that we were able to get that banned. But we've got to create more transparency and more competition. Right now, people would be shocked to know how different the prices are between going to any local pharmacy, Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, your local community pharmacy, and so on. That it's all very different. And there's no website where you can go to figure out what that cost is or what it is with your insurance copay versus not. I mean, I feel like it's always moving where's the P as they shuffle everything. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, I mean, we could absolutely do things. The fastest driver of healthcare is the cost of medicine. That's what all the hospital CEOs tell me. That's what the pharmacists tell me. That's what doctors tell me, nurses tell me, that the most uncontrollable part, I mean, there's other costs, but the most uncontrollable part, and I believe it's a very rigged system, because it's closed, you can't figure out what's going on, and there's not the competition to bring prices down.
We'll talk about the Great Lakes when we come back to The Point. Welcome back to The Point. This morning we're having a conversation with Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow. She's in an election bid this year against Republican John James. We talked about some of her efforts when it comes to the Great Lakes. Kind of go back to that first budget that you referred to,
yes,
in which the Great Lakes restoration funds were taken out.
Right.
You and your colleagues, Republicans and Democrats,
right,
worked together, got the money back in. Tell me where we are with that in this budget.
Okay. Well, it's amazing to me. After Rob Portman, who's my Republican co-chair of our Great Lakes Task Force from Ohio, after we galvanized everybody to push back, save every penny. So this budget this year, instead of 100% cut, the administration proposes 90% cut. And so we will go back again. We will put that forward. I'm fortunate to be in a position of leadership and experience to be able to push and to make that happen. But we also see that there's so many ways in which we need to be protecting our water, not only the Great Lakes around Asian carp and then what's happening with 65-year-old pipelines, or with runoff into the water that creates algae blooms, and that's why the conservation programs working with farmers is so important. There's so many things, but now we know things like PFAS. I mean, when we think about water quality and being a manufacturing state, and the fact that we're now discovering that some things that everyone thought was fine are now getting into the water, and we're having to deal with it. So I think this is a very big issue for us. 1 out of 5 jobs in Michigan comes from the Great Lakes, 1 out of 5. And that could be a bait shop, it could be selling boats, it could be a variety of things, but it's 1 out of 5. And then when you put on top of that the whole question of access to drinking water and our water quality, there's a lot of big issues around this, and I'm leading the bipartisan effort on PFAS right now to get our arms around this so we can find out where it is, what the health risks are, and support efforts to clean it up. But there's a lot there.
Well, one of the questions that I've had, and I can't expect you to answer this, but I always thought that this administration, in trying to build some kind of passable legislation, might first go to what I think is a related spending item, and that's infrastructure.
Right.
Because
right.
It occurred to me that Democrats want infrastructure for their states.
Absolutely.
Republicans want infrastructure for their states.
Absolutely.
And so there's an area that it occurred there might be some ability to move forward, but we really haven't seen a serious infrastructure bill, and that could help with things like not just PFAS or lead lines or the Line 5 or any of that, but emerging contaminants that we may only discover in the next week, month, or year. Because we've got a lot of stuff buried out there that we used to throw away and kind of haphazard, and everybody did it. I mean, that's the way it was done.
Yeah.
But when it comes to infrastructure, there's nothing in the pipeline.
There isn't. And by the way, add SULOCs to that. And I've finally got that authorized and got the Army Corps to give us a number on what it's going to cost to build a second lock. That's critical to our economy.
And the president, I believe,
he said he supported that. I would love it if he would lean in to help us be able to get this going. But this is moving through the Senate right now in a water bill. I think it was a big mistake that the White House didn't start with infrastructure when they first came into office. They said they wanted to do an infrastructure bill. We know that for every $1 trillion in spending, it's 15 million jobs, good paying middle class jobs. And that's something everybody wanted to do. I was part of a group that put a proposal within the first month of the president coming in on his desk to say, here's what we think we ought to do, and then why don't you tell us what you think we ought to do, and let's start to move. Never got a response to that. Instead, a lot of other things have happened. But now the other problem is that, many of us had talked about infrastructure spending in the context of tax reform. That's what we were working on back last Congress. And instead of doing that and doing it the right way, I think, in terms of closing tax loopholes, taking jobs overseas, and doing a number of things that would have contained the cost around this, $1.5 trillion was added to the deficit. And then once that happened, because of the tax bill, then now nobody's talking about infrastructure because they don't know how to pay for it. And so that's a big issue, and it's state and federal. And I think we've got to lean in to be able to focus on what's happening, because all of us, I mean, driving on Michigan roads, we're all paying for bent axles and tires, I mean, all kinds of problems going on. We need to stop that and instead really invest in infrastructure. And I mean broadly, not just water, sewer, roads, bridges, high-speed internet. We've got about 1 million people in Michigan with no access to internet, and yet they want to come back and live in their small town and have a great quality of life, and they don't have access to the internet. So we need 21st century infrastructure.
But as you say, if there's nothing moving, if there's nothing that's been begun, we're right up against a midterm election, and that's not a conducive time to start getting things done. A couple of minutes left, I want to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Democrats have worked for the last 2 years towards this election cycle, hoping to undo some of the congressional seats, senatorial seats, state legislatures, etc. Elections have consequences, and they're a big deal.
Right.
What is your sense, as someone who has done this, you've observed this, you've participated in this, what is your sense about the level of importance of this election cycle?
I think it's critically important, and I always joke it's not just because I'm on the ballot. I think this is maybe the most important election of my lifetime in terms of direction and tone, what we want for our country. Do we want to continue with incredible divisiveness, or reset the table with some checks and balances to try to create a different way for people to work together? I think that's really, really important. I mean, you know me. I mean, I put my head down and work hard every day, and I work across the aisle every day and get things done, whether it's a farm bill or whether it's the Great Lakes or whether it's stopping the gag rule or on and on. But in general right now, there's just a sense of everybody retreating back, and it's incredibly divisive. And there's not a sense of people feeling like they can step forward and work together. And that's not in the interest of anybody. I mean, I worry that our kids are going to not believe in a democracy and that it can actually work if we don't show that we can solve problems together. And this is a big deal right now. And I think we've got to, change some positions and reset the table here, and let people know that, people need to say, we expect you guys to work together.
As a political reporter, I suspect every 2 years I say this is the most important election cycle that I've seen, because generally speaking, that's how I feel. I think that elections are important. But let me ask you this, and I ask this from either side.
Sure.
Democrats are highly successful, and you make a bunch of switches, and you have, let's, for the sake of argument, say that you have relatively narrow majorities in both houses.
Right.
You still then have another group of people that would not be any more likely to all of a sudden become this cohesive group and work together. Conversely, Democrats don't make the gains that many would like to see them on the Democratic side and have talked about broadly. Is there anything that improves the attitude in Washington, no matter the outcome of this election?
I'm the eternal optimist, and I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, we're also seeing more and more people running and saying, elect me and I'll stop everything, put sand in the gears, which is not helpful. We need people that have differences of opinion but actually want to get something done. But I do think that a message needs to be sent that what is happening, the chaos and the instability and the divisiveness, is not okay, that people say it's not okay. And then the public needs to hold everybody's feet to the fire, to say, okay, we've reset the table, we've given you a new chance, now you guys better sit down and do something. Now, it's not going to be easy. Democracy is never easy, it's always messy, but I think we're at a moment where, if the same thing continues on, I think it's I worry about our capacity to be able to really get things done. So I want to see us, bring in, I'd love to see, because I'd love to be chair of the Agriculture Committee again, so I'd love to see the Senate become Democratic. But certainly either the House or the Senate, I think, is very important. And then we need to say, let's pass an infrastructure bill. We all drive on the roads, we all drink the water. This should not be a partisan issue. And I think the public needs to hold our feet to the fire, to do the things that matter to people every day, the things that get us up, that worry us about our kids, that worry us about our future, whether our pension's going to be there, are we going to be able to work hard and get ahead and not have to work 3 jobs to make that happen. I mean, that's what people worry about every day, and they have every right to expect that we're going to not only worry about it, but we're going to actually focus on it and actually get something done.
As I told you earlier, Senator Stabenow will face Republican John James in the general election. We'll have a conversation with him in the coming weeks. And when we come back, there's more to the point. The final word this morning is about an upcoming event right here in Grand Rapids. Let's talk a little bit about the conference that's coming up with the West Michigan Policy Forum. This every other year. You, as a co-chair, will work with a big group of business folks. You come up with recommendations and ideas and action items. But tell me about this conference and what people who attend on the 24th, is that right?
That's right.
What will they expect? What should they expect to see?
They would expect to see, we'll have an aggressive legislative policies that will come out of the conference. We have voting, so around 400 plus business leaders and business owners, CEOs will attend. And they have the opportunity to see a lot of national thought leaders have conversations, talk about things like disruption, different policies that we can look at in the state, using some other examples that we know from around the country, and some new ideas to come out with an aggressive legislative policy for 2018 and 2019.
When you look in the past, some of the things that the forum has resulted in is supporting things like third grade reading and right to work, prevailing wage, a number of reforms that have already been enacted. So it's not just a matter of meeting and voting on priorities, but then you set out to try to persuade legislators, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. We take an aggressive approach after the conference. So with the voting, we come out, we weigh those votes out, we see what the outcomes are, and then we get laser focused on going to then get those policies put in place.
And you'll have some big name speakers that will be coming through at this event too.
That's right, we do. We have a lot of our local talent will be in attendance and presenting, but we also have Dr. Tawny Farini, Dr. Edward Montgomery. We have Tony Seba, Tony Seba. He's a great presenter on disruption in business, and we want to talk about that with some policy changes and possibly around education reform.
When you talk about education reform, that's a subject that we hear a lot. A lot of people approach that different ways. What are the business community's needs when it comes to education? Because obviously one of your real interests in the business world is having qualified people that you can hire, have a workforce that helps support business.
Absolutely, Rick. Talent. So we do a listening tour around the state over the last 12 to 18 months. And so what we heard from all the business communities around the region, different regions of the state, is that they need talent. So there's a shortage of talent, and we want to prepare our students through a good educational process and policy here in Michigan to be ready to go to work for all these business leaders.
So tell me a little bit more about the conference. If you're a business leader, you want to get involved, people can still do that. Is there a website or someplace they can go to access this information?
Yeah, you can look the West Michigan Policy Forum conference up online, www.westmichiganpolicyforum.com. And so you can still sign up as a business leader, and you have the opportunity to attend on September 24th. It starts at registration at 7 a.m. and runs till about 5 p.m. Our keynote speaker in the afternoon will be Governor Jeb Bush, and so he's another one of the great speakers that we have lined up throughout the day.
We're completely out of time this morning. We'll see you next Sunday, 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To The Point.